Welcome back for the final section of the MPG conference. Just a quick reminder again, in case anyone is interested in that breakaway session on the derivatives market that is happening in the Zenith boardroom across the hall. So up next, we have a panel discussion on operational readiness and infrastructure modernization. And the moderator for this discussion is Ryan Rossam, who is an experienced banker who currently works in the Treasury and Money Markets team within Global Markets at Standard Bank. So over to you, Ryan, and your panelists.
Thank you so much. Can you guys hear me? Good afternoon. My name is Ryan Rossam. I work in the Standard Bank Treasury team, and we're going to be talking to you today about operational readiness and infrastructure modernization. I'd like to introduce my panel, or if you guys could introduce yourselves. Over to you, Ron.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Ruan Roo. I am the least technical person in this room today, between all the bankers, insurers, and asset managers. So I've spent most of my career in corporate investment banking on the business operations side, transformational type programs. But lately, I'm in my second IT job as head of enterprise architecture for the bank, and I guess that's how I draw the short straw, also being the chair for the DCI meeting because of both the business and technical and data side of that work stream.
Thank you. Jill?
Good afternoon. I'm Jill Rain, currently at a CISO, previously a banker.
Good afternoon. I'm Gregory Naka, head of CSD services at Straight.
When you're so well known in the market, that's all.
Good afternoon. I'm Kim Robertson. I'm heading up the program for the First Strand Group and managing the project as a whole. I've got history in banking as well as asset management.
Excellent. Thanks, Kim. We've got the graveyard shift here today. A lot of people seem to have left, but we're going to try and keep you entertained on this riveting topic. So we've got 4 topics to talk to you about today. Developments to modernize market infrastructure, and a few questions around that. Then we're going to be talking to you about the work underway to enable the use of Zeronia in cash markets. Then we're going to be talking to you about the readiness of clearinghouses to support Zeronia-based OTC derivatives. And then lastly, Java conversion and Zeronia discounting. Okay, developments to modernize market infrastructure. The first 2 questions are similar in nature. The first one relates to regulators, and then the next 2 market participants. So, Ruan, this question is for you primarily. What have been the key learnings from the global move to overnight reference rates, and are the regulators able to effectively leverage the systems and tools that have been developed following the global reform?
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. I guess the answer is it depends. Because we're following other markets, there's definitely a case of we having it maybe a bit easier when it comes down to the actual systems and processes that we can leverage off what was already done in the market. But I think the richness of it is the fact that you're looking at transparency and IOSCO principles and getting the data. So it's all about harvesting the data, consolidating the data as a reference point, and then publishing it. That's where the real value is as to what the impact is on regulators. As to have the data, it's the visibility of the trading transactions and then the valuable insights that you can do it. And I think one of the speakers asking earlier around maybe some of the calculations that can be applied. So one of the sources, you've got a rich source of data. But it also comes with the caveat that I don't think this is, if you go into the technology side of the conversation, it's not something like to buy off the shelf. You can't go into Google and go and look for a calculation engine and click it and swipe a credit card. So what I think from the regulator's point of view is becoming the calculation agents is also to understand what technologies they have to bring in and what operational efficiencies that they need to build around that. But in that lies some opportunities as well to say, one of the criticisms that you would get sometimes in this environment is the cost and burden of regulation. And certainly we've seen with data calculation is the amount of data that we're now collecting. it also starts creating us an opportunity of what technologies we can bring in to smooth out that process and make it cheaper.
Right. And then the next question then is for Kim and for Jill, around how market participants have been able to then effectively leverage the systems and tools that have been developed following global reform. I mean, we had spoken about, you know, the ease of adoption for the fact that we've had system requirements from LIBOR that...
Okay,
you know,
so to put that in perspective, clearly South African asset managers do not manage large global portfolios. So there was obviously the big life companies that have international operations did go through the transition. But so that would be the big life companies that have got international operations. But largely the domestic asset managers have been pretty remote from that, you know, from that experience.
Right.
So this is pretty much new. I think it was raised earlier that, you know, there are users of various systems like Murex that have been adopted to include the modules
Yeah.
that would make it easier. So I think from a technology perspective, availability of systems is there. But from the actual experience, I think particularly the legal work stream is a challenge for some of the asset managers.
Kim, from First
Okay.
Rand's perspective?
So from a loan market perspective, yes, the legal work stream is, and the legals are a bit of a challenge. I'm going to reiterate what Masidi said earlier around the readiness of the loan market in terms of robust fallback language that can now be used in contracts. That means that you only have to visit that contract once. You don't actually have to go and renegotiate it towards the end of the life of JIBAR. The contract that has been developed by the LMA, which you can get access to via banks or via your legal representatives who are part of the LMA, can be used and can see you right through to the actual transition by using smart clauses like what is the CAS and defining that, and what is the date and defining that in terms of not putting a hard date in, potentially putting a reference to 3 months prior to the announced cessation date, those kinds of things. So that's the loan market. Where it gets a little bit trickier is the bond and the money market. So as Jill said, the systems should theoretically cater for it, and that's the big asset management systems. Where it becomes a little bit trickier is for the guys that have gone and developed things in-house. And that probably reference a 3-month rate or a month rate or an annual rate, and that becomes then a bit trickier to move to an overnight rate. Saying that though, if they are able to trade FRNs, Joel and I were having this discussion a little bit earlier, it's just a more resetting FRN, really. You don't reset your FRN every 3 months, you reset it every day, and you accumulate that, that accrued interest. From a money market perspective, they are used to being agile and fairly robust in the market in that they currently use an overnight rate and they use very short-term instruments to add into the money market unit trusts and also in the money market itself. So I think agility is a benefit there for most of the money market users. They do now have to cater for a one-day look back, which was a little bit of a grudge purchase on that part, but definitely I think in line with the publication times, it had to be adhered, you know, we had to cater for that.
Excellent.
I think just so I can add one other aspect, and that's prime floating rate notes.
Yes.
You know, we think of prime as being fixed, but it's not, it changes intra-period. So the systems are available to change the rate for a floating rate note linked to a variable rate intra-period. So we're just changing an MPC, we're having MPC every day. Yeah.
Ron, you want to add something?
Yeah, maybe I can add. So experience, I do think in terms of the bond loan cash market, it's going to be a different conversation around. You're asking the question around systems and technology. I think it's going to be a deeper conversation. My experience has been on the derivatives infrastructure readiness. When it comes to actually the systems readiness side, integration into those systems and flows between organizations, that the technical conversation is actually quite quick, and the technical work could be done fairly quickly because lessons from other IBOR reforms. What we found is that most of the industry had a wait-and-see mentality to it. To say, yes, we can do it, but what would be the reason for moving? So if you look at your clearing brokers, I think market-wide LCH was on board immediately, but I think as you go downstream into it, the conversation was more around to say, let's do wait and see. And we've started shifting that conversation to say you can't wait for a trigger event in the industry then to act on your readiness for the market, but rather start planning back from when the trigger events are going to happen.
Okay, excellent. Thanks for those contributions. So in summary then, there certainly is some leverage that the various market participants have been able to benefit from, but in some cases, like in the asset managers where there hasn't been a large exposure to LIBOR, there is a lot more work to be done. Okay, the next question is then for Greg, and this relates to LEI. Greg, talk to us about what LEI is and explain the importance of market adoption.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. So let me start off by saying with every global crisis, you get a new acronym, right? So LEI is actually not a new acronym. 2008 with the Lehman crisis saw lots of new findings coming about around tracking of risk exposure from companies. LEI was born in 2008, by the way. So it's a legal entity identifier. It's a global term. If I can simply explain it, it's tracking companies. Tracking a parent company with subsidiaries and understanding what risk exposure or what exposures or risk exposures those companies are exposed to. So in every jurisdiction, or in multiple jurisdictions, you can have LOUs, which are accredited by the Global Association. In South Africa, Straight is the LOU for the South African community, and we issue LOIs on a regular basis. As a response to the market, in probably the last 6 weeks, we've sent out quite a bit of material around starting to recreate awareness around LEI, more so from a regulatory perspective, because once LEIs are introduced into the environment, there's an ability to track and transparency for regulators as well as the market as a whole. We see quite a big uptake in the adoption of LEIs in South Africa. As an example, if you're investing offshore, you cannot invest offshore without having an LEI as an institution. It's mandatory in Europe, it's mandatory in the UK, it's mandatory in the US. We're seeing quite a big adoption strategy in South Africa. The FSCA has recently issued quite a nice guidance note around LEI. It's on their website. Please have a look at it if you don't. I can share it through the panel, through the community as well, so that you can have access to it. But it's really that simple, right? It's creating more transparency at a company level, so tracking is more easily available when it's required.
Right, and I guess just a reference to the data that the banks are now sending to the SARB, it includes this LEI indicator. So there is discussions underway to talk about making that information mandatory, and then obviously that will make the data more enriched.
Yeah, 100%. And it's already mandatory in certain aspects, to your point, right? So certain transactions to the sub above certain thresholds needs the LEI in there. Derivatives market, OTC derivatives, it's already part of the regulation. If you're short selling, if you short sell in the market, you need to provide an LEI. Right, so it is coming. I guess my message to the industry is, again, maybe to echo what Rowan said, don't have a wait and approach kind of attitude towards these types of things. The industry is moving. Introduce it into your protocols and your communication and your business lines, so that at some point I can tell you that the regulator will look to mandate LEIs in South Africa across all channels from an investment perspective. I think let's get ready for that.
Excellent. Thanks for that, Greg. The next thing is also an important, modernisation to our market infrastructure, and we've been talking about this as an industry for some time, and that is the implementation of a trade repository. So, Greg, over to you again. Would you mind giving us an update on where we are with a trade repository?
Yeah, so, I mean, we as a Straight have been working with the regulator for quite a while now in terms of unpacking what a trade repository could look for South Africa. Let me at the outset say that the trade repositories globally have one biggest issue, quality of data. Right, all of them have had that pain, and as a result, you won't find a lot of trade repositories in the global markets. There's a handful of them. We took a long time from a Straight perspective to really understand if we should apply for that license in South Africa, and we've come up with what I think is quite a nice operating model that, at a principle level, does not introduce more costs into the market, and that was one principle that we wanted to adopt in applying for the repository license. We have applied for it in February of this year. I'm going to use the statement, please don't ask me to unbundle it, right? We're 50% there, right? And hopefully within the next few months, we should be able to notify the market that the trade repository has been licensed. It's really big for the country from a G20 perspective. We probably the only country sitting on the G20 that does not have a trade repository, and we're taking the chair next year. So I'm hoping that the licensing process will move forward quite swiftly, and we can announce to the market that we are licensed as a trade repository. But what does that mean, right? Again, it's one word: transparency, right? So the trade repository gives transparency not only to the ODPs but also to the regulators, and it's around managing risk, and that's really what the trade repository is about. And how would it contribute to the reference rate reform? I mean, the more visibility there are around transactions, the more insights you can gain as an industry. The more you can understand behavior, the more you can understand if you need to step in as the regulators, and you need to step in as the banks or the buy side to take the market forward. And there's also a long-term discussion around long-term reference rate reform, etc. So there's lots of positives that will come out of the trade repository. And also, it's the first time that we're getting licensed in South Africa to have let's call it a repository of such sorts. So we'll also learn from this and evolve and make it better for the market.
Excellent, thanks. And then I guess the last important one is the local CCP. I think there's been a lot of discussion around this point, and actually Kim and Jill attended a meeting yesterday, the Joint Markets Platform meeting. Guys, do you have anything that's worthwhile telling the conference today?
Well, we can tell you an awful lot about emoji reporting. But apart from that, if you look at the evolution of amendments to the way the OTC derivatives market works, the last outstanding is mandatory clearing. And there's currently a work group within the PA and FISCA to discuss the terms and conditions under which there will be mandatory clearing, but at this stage, there's no mandatory clearing of OTC derivatives. I know JSE Clear has been engaging on establishing an OTC derivatives CCP, but until such time as there's mandatory clearing, there isn't sufficient volume or interest. So that's still an outstanding. Kim, I don't know if you want to add anything.
Yeah, I'd just like to add to the trade repository item. So the trade repository for Straight is OTC. And then we are also in discussions with LCH around how we can get that data through, not to the banks, to the regulator, so that we can get the trade repositories combined, and that'll then help us to actually underpin a potential term rate. So it's one of the requirements that we've stipulated in our term rate paper that'll get us to a term rate. We need some way of harvesting the data to actually get us there. Yeah.
Excellent, thanks for adding that.
Jill covered the meeting yesterday.
Yeah. Great, thanks so much, team. Okay, that brings the first topic to conclusion. The next one is around the work underway to enable the use of Zeronia in cash markets. Kim, I'm going to direct the first question to you. What are the key next steps in the timeline to facilitate readiness of Zeronia in the various cash markets?
Okay, so we've already discussed the loan market. Essentially, loan market is already there. They can push language in. The language can go into new contracts. Contracts can be outright Zeronia based from now effectively. There is a slight gap in that the LMA have not introduced outright language yet, but that is underway, and we can use the rate switch agreements to actually craft that in the interim. So that's the loan market. On the on the balance of the cash market, so the bond market and the money market, we do have industry, and I'm not going to steal Greg's thunder over here, but we do have industry work streams dealing with this in conjunction with Straight and the JSE and various other market participants to actually get the work done. I'm going to hand over to Greg in terms of the Straight readiness for bond and money market.
Yeah, thanks, Kim. So maybe let me just start off by saying that I think that we mustn't underestimate, how big this change is for the industry. So if I think about it at an ecosystem level, we've got the exchanges, we've got the banks, we've got the sell side, the buy side, we've got international clients, all that need to be ready so that when we effectively go live, that the risks are managed in a way in the market that doesn't expose investors to risks or issuers to risks. So we have agreed with the market that at a very high level that our initial, let's call it, tentative go-live date for this particular change is in May of next year. Now, notwithstanding that, there is a couple of levers that we can play with. And this is probably my ask to the audience today. So from a Straight perspective, I've committed to the working groups that we will be ready to open up to the industry to start testing and validating the platform and the new changes by the end of Jan. Straight as the market infrastructure needs to be ready by end of October. As you can imagine, for those that are market infrastructures and you support the ecosystem, you have to be ready way before anyone else can connect into your environment. So if you think about it from your institution's perspective, we will be ready to open up so that you can start integrating it into our environment from end of Jan. If as an industry, you can either connect through your back office systems or you can connect through front ends, but you have the ability to operationalize yourself in this new world. The ask from the working group is that you raise your hands and you provide us with that feedback as we go through this change process. By the way, the first change check-in is on Monday, so unfortunately I can't give you an update on where the market is. But I can tell you Straight's probably already at about 40% ready. So if we move on that trajectory, and if the industry responds to being ready to participate and have a conversation and integrate with us by the end of Jan as a starting point, I can come back to the working groups and maybe realign the May date to an earlier date. But the things that we look out for as we go through this process, obviously outside of readiness, the technical readiness, as Ruan mentioned as well, technical readiness is actually quite easy. It's the change process from an operational perspective. It's a change process from a people and resources perspective. So a lot of things need to be taken into consideration within the ecosystem. Because the one thing that we don't want to be faced with when we go live is that something has failed in the investment in our world from a Straight perspective, and then we are in the global markets spotlight because that notice gets pushed out to all global, let's call it the global markets. So we're very careful in terms of how we manage and balance the risk and timelines and implementations. I've done this before with Ruan and Zakele and the team. I'm confident that from a Straight perspective, we'll be ready. My call to the market is, if there is pressure in this particular work stream linked to your go live for Zeronia, then, or the transition for Zeronia, then please come and have a conversation with us. We're always happy to renegotiate timelines based on the ability for you to go live, and also consider what are option B, option C, and then bring you in from a fully digital perspective over a period of time. Understanding that each institution is at a different place from a technical priority resource perspective. So that's where we are from a market perspective.
Thanks for that, Greg. And I guess, from a participant perspective, the people in this room have the ability to influence the priority around these change programs to support meeting those dates earlier. So certainly from a Standard Bank perspective, we're trying to bring in our timelines to implement that earlier as well.
Great stuff.
Okay. Jill, can you talk to us about what some of the issues or some of the unresolved issues that we're giving attention to?
Well, guess what? Ex-dates. So there's 75% of the corporate bond market for banks, including banks, are floaters linked to JIBAR. And there are 2 from National Treasury. The 2 from National Treasury have got a 10-day ex period. Of the 1,800 floating rate notes, 60% have got ex dates in excess of 5 days. So that means that these bonds will go ex coupon before you know what the Zaronia reset is, which is a problem. It means that you will have to interpolate what the rate is unless we change the ex dates. Unfortunately, in the current framework, if you have a material terms and conditions in the APS, the applicable pricing supplement, you have to go to vote from all note holders. And I do believe that it's not feasible for the industry to go and vote on changing of ex dates, which they don't have to change, but interpolation just becomes very complicated from a system perspective. But to go to voting on 1,800 different securities in the current period is not feasible. For those of you who've been through a voting process, and I can see a few DCM people around, it's challenging. And we won't ask Greg about BND files. But that is one of the key aspects that we believe needs to be sorted out, just for pure efficiency, to have ex dates that are lower than the look-back period. And I'm not even going to talk about shortening the ex date period to 1 day. But that clearly would make the group treasurers a lot happier because they wouldn't have that 5-day interest rate risk. So that's one issue.
Right. Thanks.
Can I just add
yes,
that
please.
was one of the factors that influenced the work stream's decision to put the bond market at a 5-day look back. So most of the ex periods were 5 days, and we felt that was a good average to go with. But on looking at it, there's actually quite a lot. We did also run a work stream, in that work stream, we looked at potentially getting rid of the X days altogether, and there was quite a bit of pushback on that. However, I do think there's room for innovation here in terms of maybe issuing bonds without X days going forward, and the market should probably have a look at that and have a think about it.
I feel like that's a question for me, but anyway. Yeah, so it is something that we'll take up, Jill and Kim. I think it's even if it's not an X date, let's call it a complete removal of X date from the APS, we definitely need to move to when new issuances are being issued, that they utilize a different methodology. Otherwise, you're just going to perpetuate this thing. And 1,800 is going to become 2,500 quickly, and then the market's going to be sitting with this problem forever. So I guess that's something that State will take away.
Thank you.
The other thing that we discovered through our discussions in this work group was around Straight being previously appointed as a publishing agent for the reference rate. So in terms of Zaronia, we need these levels of where these instruments are being traded to be published. and that's something that we think we may have missed. So it's something that we need to formalise and get that sorted out so there is visibility around these prices.
Yeah, I have raised that with Mr. Zakele. So it's on his to-do list.
Cool.
So that was to do with the no code of conduct, that there would be no code of conduct for Zaronia, hence the lack of need to appoint a publishing agent. Yeah.
Can't hear you? Nope.
No.
No?
Thanks. I see you're very strategic. You talk trade repository and you hope that the FSCA can hear you. And then now you're talking about... yeah, so it won't be necessary to have a code of conduct in this case because we've issued reporting instructions that tell banks exactly what is expected. There is a policy that governs some of these benchmarks, and so our responsibilities are articulated in that particular policy for sub-administered benchmarks. But in terms of enhancing transparency, it is something that we will look at so that we can release more information, so we would know, as you were saying, you know, what are the segments of the market and how those are pricing relative to other segments. We would just have to create a report that adds value and determine the regularity of that report. But we won't have maybe straight as a publishing agent as we would currently have with the process for JABA, because with that they actually have the underlying transactions, and it made sense for them to then release such information. But with Zaronia, we collect that data directly, and we already have it, and due to POPIA issues and like that, we can't just so share it. So we would have to publish that information at an aggregate level. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Sekile. Okay. And then I think earlier in a previous panel they spoke about the issue around home loans being linked to JABA. So there's a separate working group that's going to be set up to address that issue.
We actually met yesterday for the first
excellent.
time. So that is being run out of the cash market work stream. Our plan is to have a paper that goes back to the MPG for approval on the way forward, why we potentially can't use some things, why other things make sense in that market, and that'll be from a predominantly a retail space. So we've got all the retail market guys involved in that for this section. That'll be presented to the MPG, and then they can endorse it, and we can move forward from there.
So the next section relates to the readiness of clearinghouses to support Zaronia-based OTC derivatives. Ruan, this question is for you. Please can you outline the importance of clearinghouses and clearing brokers and why it is essential to have their buy-in for an effective transition program?
Well, I guess in short, it's about credibility and building liquidity. So from the onset, when we work with the derivatives workstream, and I think either Jay or Richard said it, for you to build up efficient liquidity in the market, you need to have the foundations right. And we always went from the point of view to say, you need to have clearing eligibility, you need to have your clearing brokers on board, local international price makers committing prices, market wire integration, and interdealer brokers willingness to show prices. So if you look at the whole ecosystem, it's important to build liquidity through having clearing eligibility on the one hand, so to making sure that you've got a broader market, but at the same time, if you're not a member of the clearinghouse, you need to go through a clearing broker. Hence why it's also important for the clearing brokers to be on board. And since a lot of the liquidity that is in the international market, clearing broker onboarding is quite important. Now, if you look at the South African banks, so we share about 8 clearing brokers across at the moment, and we've engaged with those 8 clearing brokers, and as of today, we have 3 of those clearing brokers ready to clear with LCH. So there's maybe an inherent risk in the uptake of derivatives because of the clearing brokers.
Right. I guess that brings us to the next point around the risk market participants face if their clearing brokers do not adopt Zeronia in time. So, as you mentioned, only 3 of the 8 have come online so far. Okay. The other point that we wanted to talk about was, the role of the pricing platforms. If you could just give us some thoughts around what your experience has been dealing with Bloomberg and Refinitiv.
Yeah, I guess in short, because I see we're running out of time, so, it's all about pricing availability and visibility. And I think, again, it was lessons learned from previous market transitions, is that I think it was a non-event. So pricing platforms can provide the pricing screens as of today, and the uptake of it was very rapid within a couple of weeks. So I think that's the one part where, if you look at the complete ecosystem, lessons from previous jurisdictions made it very easy.
Excellent, thanks. Okay, we are running out of time, so I'll quickly wrap up. We're on the last topic, which is around JIBAR conversion and Zeronia discounting. Kim, this is for you. What are the critical dependencies in order for LCH and SwapClear to ultimately deliver an effective clearing Zeronia-based products?
So I think Ruan has covered it. The clearing houses need to be ready. And then we need settlement. So that just talks about the whole ecosystem from a derivatives point of view, which Ruan and the team are busy tracking in conjunction with Ajay and the derivatives work stream and Richard. So it is important for us to get up and running, and as Ruan said, 3 out of the 8 are there. We are pushing very hard. Ajay mentioned that we've got a market makers forum, and we're using that platform to allow the various different organizations to engage with their clearing brokers and encourage them to be ready, certainly by the end of the month when we want to do our inaugural LCH trade on the whole ecosystem. So that's including MarketWire, LCH, and it'll be with most of the banks. Okay.
Excellent.
I just wanted to also update, Ivan mentioned that we are running a curves work stream. So that also is underway. We will produce a paper out of that. It'll then go for market comment, and we'll find a vendor. Well, DCI will assist us in helping find a vendor to actually publish that curve.
Excellent. Okay, that brings us to the end of our panel. Should we open up the floor for some questions?
Ajay, and you also mentioned that we might have the first derivative trades on Zeronia soonish. I can think it might be an encouragement to the market that you can start seeing volume building in Zeronia in the absence of trade repositories, etc. Would it be possible to capture that information to be able to publish it?
Who would like to take that question? I'm not sure what the answer would be. Go for it, Kim. Thank you.
The short answer is no. The long answer is if the teams are comfortable sharing the information with probably the regulator, because it would need to be anonymized, then the longer answer is yes. We would like to to have sight of what is going on in the market, and certainly the liquidity build around that. The tricky thing with that is if it's an OTC, then it's difficult for us to track at the moment with Art of Trade repository. If it's LCH, we can probably get that information pushed down to the regulator.
Okay, excellent.
But, Ryan, before any other questions, just to make a point which I know is near to your heart, pending the ability of Straight to clear Zaronia instruments, learning by doing is the best way. So bilateral Zaronia loans between banks and asset managers is the quickest way to test your systems. And it would be great to see not test trades as in play, but as in real bilateral trades between banks and investors. It certainly would give people much more feel for how the market evolves and what the relative pricing should be.
Seems
So
like
it's
the
over to
obvious
you.
next choice for banks to get that going bilaterally with their clients. Okay, we're out of time, so we need to wrap up. Thank you so much for your participation today.
Thank you.